Pearl, Paducah, Jonesboro, and Littleton. The names echo through our minds as if they were Civil War battlefields. Instead, they are towns where public schools in the 1990s have become war zones.
5 minutes ago, I was in my room, and everything was so normal. And now here I am, out here on the playground, and it's like being in a horror show.
I believe at the time they were firing those guns and pulling those triggers, they were wanting to see the people in the crosshairs fall down.
I'm going to tell you that I cannot, to this day, find one reason that you could put your finger on and say, this is why it happened.
It could have been anybody's kids. It could have been my kids who were the victims, and it could have been my kids who were the killers. And if you don't think so, then you're in denial.
Hello, I'm Bill Curtis. On April 20th, 1999, teenagers Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris killed 12 students, a teacher, and then themselves at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado. While the Columbine school shooting was the worst to date, it was, of course, not the first. As the details of that tragedy unfold and the courts grapple with the lawsuits and the other criminal charges, American justice focuses on a case that shocked the nation just 1 year earlier, one that has already made its way through the legal system. Tuesday, March 24th, 1998. The morning began like any other in Jonesboro, Arkansas, a small town just over 100 miles northeast of Little Rock. At Westside Middle School, boisterous students just back from spring break made their way into the building and then settled in for classes. Around 12:30 that afternoon, the quiet in the hallways was shattered by the sound of a fire alarm.
And I remember at first thinking it must be a real fire. Because, you know, we're usually told about fire drills. We know in advance that we're going to have them.
The students lined up, and their teachers led them out to the playground. They watched the school for signs of fire, unaware that the real danger was outside and only moments away.
I started hearing what I thought was firecrackers. I looked, and there were different children just in different shapes going down.
At first, no one knew what the sound was or where it was coming from. There were cries of confusion, then shrieks of pain.
I realized at that point that we're being shot at. And I saw the dust on the sidewalk. Whenever the bullets would hit the sidewalk, dust would fly up off of it.
The shooting seemed slow, methodical. Then the bullets began flying more rapidly. Panic gripped teachers and students alike as they tried to find cover, and bullets found their targets.
The force of the bullet kind of spun me around, and I hit the ground. And I saw there was a little girl that was there and laying on the sidewalk, and her back was completely covered in blood. And that's the point when I realized that, you know, it was very serious, that there were people dying.
One teacher, Shannon Wright, was on her knees, wounded in her chest and right arm. She had shielded a girl's body from the gunfire with her own. The snipers kept firing as teachers and students fell to the ground, screaming and bleeding. Staff members still inside the building frantically called 911.
911, where's your emergency?
This is been shot at Westside Middle School.
911, where's your emergency?
This is Westside Middle School. We have several children down. We need more than one ambulance.
And we've got all
We
the
need
ambulance.
police too.
We've got all the
We got
ambulance.
shots fired.
Okay, they're still being fired. Where are they coming
I
from?
don't know, but it looks like they're coming from the woods.
The police arrived just after the shooting had stopped. Construction workers on the school's roof told them they saw smoke rising from the woods and two small figures fleeing, headed north.
It was like, you know, this is not really happening. You know, this doesn't happen in Craighead County in Jonesboro. This is not normal.
Officer Terry McNabb approached the scene of the crime from the northeast. When he heard over his police radio that two suspects were on foot, he turned off the highway onto a small gravel road that ran near the woods. McNatt spotted them just 200 yards from the school.
We're expecting two adults to be in the woods running, and when you cross the ridge and they're running north, it's two little boys dressed in camouflage.
The boys were captured less than 20 minutes after the fire alarm rang. Sirens and news bulletins created chaos in Jonesboro. Roads became clogged with the media and families trying to find out what was going on.
I heard it on the radio, and basically what I heard was there was a shooting at a school, and I had my boss with me, and I looked at him, I said, "It's Westside."
I think we're actually running towards the high school, and I hear somebody behind me say that it's a shooting at the middle school. And we start running towards the middle school, and I'm thinking, who would shoot little kids?
The answer would be almost as stunning as the shooting itself. The captured suspects were both students at Westside. Andrew Golden was 11 years old and in 6th grade. Mitchell Johnson was 13 years old and in 7th grade. Officers handcuffed the two boys, read them their rights, and searched them.
I just couldn't believe how many weapons they had, and in every pocket you stuck your hand in, there were shells, bullets, a gun, or a knife.
They were then taken to the Craighead County Detention Center. There, police instructed them to remove their camouflage outerwear. They were left barefoot in their blue jeans and T-shirts in a holding cell. At this point, the wounded were arriving at St. Bernard's Hospital. The emergency staff set up a waiting area outside the intensive care unit for the families.
They kept on telling us that she was stable, and so you think that means she's going to make it.
And the doctor comes in and he says, he introduces himself and the doctor that was with him, and he said, "Miss Wilson, we worked on your little girl when they brought her in, and he said we weren't able to save her, and it was just so. I'll never forget that feeling. I thought that just can't be. This cannot be. You cannot be talking about my child."
Suzanne Wilson's 11-year-old daughter, Brittany Varner, was one of 4 young girls who died that day. Natalie Brooks was also 11. Paige Ann Herring and Stephanie Johnson were 12. Also killed was their 32-year-old teacher, Shannon Wright. After receiving the news, her husband Mitchell took his 3-year-old son home and tried to explain what happened.
So we go in the house, and he's, "No, Dad, Mama's here." And he started looking for her. I picked him up, and I said, "She's not here." I said, "She's in heaven." And he said, "Well, when can she come back?" And I said, "She can't come back."
In addition to the dead, 10 others, 8 girls, 1 boy, and a teacher, had been wounded.
You know, I've seen people commit suicide. I've seen homicides. I've seen all kinds of cases and dealt with all kinds of cases. But there's nothing I don't think it's ever going to be in my career or any of these other officers that touch this that's ever going to be anything like this.
There was little to ease the anguish following the shooting at Westside Middle School on March 24, 1998. Even the authorities could not contain their emotions.
When the fire alarm went off, the kids run outside, and what it looks like right now, when they started shooting at the children, 13 children got hit. I know of one looks like he's dead, 10-7, okay?
4 young girls and a teacher died that day. 10 others were wounded. The perpetrators turned out to be classmates. 11-year-old Andrew Golden and 13-year-old Mitchell Johnson, captured within minutes of the shooting.
I turned on the TV and turned on the radio and heard all the reports like everybody else of people hurt, people killed. I, like everybody else, went crazy, not knowing, not having no vehicle to get up there.
Gretchen Woodard's 2 sons attended Westside, and she was concerned for their safety.
It was 2:37 that day when a friend called me, and I'd said to, these reports were saying that 2 boys were arrested, and she said, "My God, no one has said anything to you, have they?"
Gretchen was horrified to learn her son Mitch was one of the killers. He brought home A's on his report card and sang at nursing homes with his church group. She considered him a role model for his brother and sister, 11-year-old Monty and 2-year-old Jesse.
Mitch was always Jesse's kind of downtime, I guess. He would sit and read to her. Probably 8 times out of 10, she'd fall asleep in his lap at night. He was truly a good kid, and I did not foresee this coming at all.
But there were numerous signs that Mitchell was, in fact, a disturbed child. His early childhood was spent in a troubled home in Minnesota. His father was prone to rages that left Mitchell sweating and trembling in fear. In 1994, when Mitchell was 9 years old, his parents went through a contentious divorce. Both father and mother received restraining orders. At the time, Mitchell's mother was working as a prison guard. She soon met an inmate, Buddy Woodard, who had done time on a drug and weapons charge. After Buddy's parole, Gretchen moved with her children to Arkansas to be with him. They eventually married. It was a difficult adjustment for Mitchell. He was teased about his weight and often picked fights.
Apparently neighbors have commented on his switches in moods, that he could go from one mood to another where they could barely recognize him, that he was a sweet, lovely boy at times and at other times was fierce and aggressive.
Mitchell frequently stayed with his father and relatives back in Minnesota. Friends said he resented being shuttled between his parents. They claimed he listened to violent rap lyrics, bragged about belonging to a gang, and according to one account, once carved a girlfriend's name in his arm with a razor blade. In 1997, while living with his father, 12-year-old Mitchell was charged with inappropriately touching a 3-year-old girl. A hearing in juvenile court had been scheduled for the summer of 1998. After the ambush, Mitchell claimed that starting at the age of 8, he had been sexually abused by an older boy in Minnesota. The abuse allegedly occurred for over a year in a park near his grandmother's house. Mitchell hadn't told his parents about his alleged abuse, and the incident wasn't investigated until after the shooting. The results of that investigation are not known. His juvenile court records are sealed. Experts believe that children sexually abuse other children if they themselves experienced the same trauma.
It's devastating to a young child to be repeatedly sexually abused or raped. It engenders rage, it engenders helplessness. The worst thing I think that it does is that it tends to predispose the child to doing unto others what was done to him.
After the ambush, classmates reported having heard Mitch make threats that, quote, he had a lot of killing to do.
He was like, whoever didn't like him or whoever broke up with him, whoever he thought was a snob, he was going to shoot him, like he was going to bring him down the next day and shoot him.
He was always talking about he was going to do it, and I never thought he would.
He always talked about he was going to do what?
He was going to come and shoot people and bring a knife to school and stuff, and I never thought he'd do it.
Mitchell's violent tendencies would only be fully realized when he came to know Andrew Golden. And though they would become accomplices in a horrific crime, those who knew them best don't remember the two as close friends. They weren't seen together, and no one knows how or when they devised their plan. Andrew Golden, known as Drew, grew up with guns. His father and grandfather owned handguns and rifles and taught him how to hunt. Drew received his first shotgun as a Christmas present at the age of 6.
It's a shame that the person that taught him how to use a gun didn't teach him the responsibility of how to use it and how important human life is.
Andrew practiced at a shooting range and further honed his reflexes on the video games at the local bowling alley. He also played trumpet in the Westside Band and often stopped by his grandparents' house for hot chocolate on the way to school. His teacher considered him a typical 11-year-old boy.
Little boys occasionally will be a little rambunctious, and I would get on to him frequently, just asking him to be quiet, but nothing out of the ordinary.
But in the search for answers after the shooting, a different picture of Andrew began to emerge. Reportedly, back in the first grade, he had shot a girl in the face with a pop gun filled with gravel. By the age of 7, Drew was practicing his marksmanship on pets. When a little girl in Andrew's neighborhood found her cat dead in a trash can, she said Andrew had claimed he shot it with a pellet gun. The incident was never reported to the authorities. For 13-year-old Mitchell Johnson, Tuesday morning, March 24th, began with his mother telling him to hurry to catch the school bus. He went out to the road, but soon returned.
Mitch had run back in the house and had said that he'd missed the school bus and that Buddy, or Dad as he calls him, was going to take him to school.
His mother didn't know that Mitchell had deliberately missed the bus and that her husband had already left for work without the van or her son.
And so I never thought a thing of it. I mean, when I looked out and the van was gone, I never give it a second thought.
In fact, Mitchell had stolen the van and driven it to Andrew Golden's house. Together, the boys tried to break open a gun safe with a propane torch, but failed. They settled for several handguns that had not been locked up. They spent the next few hours stocking the van with ammunition, food, camping equipment, and a hand-drawn map to a hideout location. The next stop, Drew's grandfather's house. Doug Golden was an officer for the State Game and Fish Commission. The boys knew he owned a large collection of firearms. They used a crowbar to break into his house through a basement door. 4 handguns were found hidden under mattresses. High-powered rifles were locked up in a gun rack on the living room wall, but Drew knew where to find the key. They drove less than a mile to a residential street north of Westside Middle School and headed on foot to an ideal vantage point. Shortly after 12:30 p.m., a student saw Andrew run into the school and pull the fire alarm. Classmates and teachers filed out. The boys opened fire and kept shooting for nearly 4 minutes. When Craighead County prosecutor Mike Walden arrived at the crime scene, he found out that the suspects were only 11 and 13 years old.
I think we knew from that point it's not going to be very long till I have to start looking the families, the victims, in the eye and tell them that what Arkansas law provided for juveniles of this age.
March 25th, 1998, the day after the deadly attack on Westside Middle School in Jonesboro, Arkansas. Authorities shielded Mitchell Johnson and Andrew Golden from the press as they were led into the preliminary detention hearing. The charges against them, 5 counts of capital murder, 10 counts of first-degree battery. Back in his holding cell, Mitchell wept and appeared remorseful. He requested a Bible and a minister. The younger boy, Andrew, began to cry and begged for his mother. Neither boy seemed to grasp fully the trouble they were in. Both wanted pizza for lunch. Request denied. While Mitchell and Andrew struggled with the daily routine in the county jail, the families of the victims faced the terrible realization of what they had lost.
I'm not real sure how to explain how that feels. You just kind of move through the daily motions and do what you have to do. But it's just not natural to pick out a dress for your daughter's funeral. And, you know, I kept thinking about that. I kept thinking I could buy her, I could pick out a wedding dress and a prom dress, but I can't pick out that.
The day after the shooting, Prosecutors held a meeting at Westside Middle School with the families of the victims to explain the realities of the juvenile justice system. They told the group that under Arkansas law, a defendant in a capital murder case would have to be at least 14 years old on the day of the crime to be tried as an adult. Mitchell was 13. His accomplice, Andrew, was only 11. The prosecutor explained that the boys had to be tried as juveniles. He had no choice in the matter.
You know, and being perfectly candid, I would think if there's ever been a death penalty case, or a case that the standard rule of thumb, or people would think, does this merit the death penalty? I think this would have been it.
Walden believed that Judge Ralph Wilson, Jr. would grant his request for the maximum sentence. But that sentence called for the boys to be held in a juvenile facility until the age of 21, and then released with a clean record and no court supervision. To complicate matters, the state's one juvenile detention center with maximum security was not equipped to hold anyone past the age of 18.
You don't think that they're going to walk. And basically, finally, they told everyone, and it dawned on all the families. Ooh, there were so many people that were so angry and so hurt.
There was open wailing. There were people that were just literally, you know, out of control emotionally almost when they had to deal with this. And I'm sitting here thinking, would I be any different? How can I blame them? They've just lost a child.
August 11th, 1998 was Mitchell Johnson's 14th birthday and the day of his sentencing in juvenile court. An irony not lost on the families. Had he been 14 on March 24th, less than 5 months earlier, he could have been tried as an adult and faced life in prison. That morning, Mitchell and Andrew were led handcuffed through the back door of the Craighead County Courthouse in Jonesboro, Arkansas. In front of the building, over 100 spectators filed in, past metal detectors and bomb-sniffing dogs. Many of them were relatives of the slain students and teacher. In an effort to spare them further anguish, the prosecution and defense agreed beforehand to dispense with a formal trial. Instead, the facts of the case would be presented undisputed. The boys would enter their pleas, and the judge would rule. As the hearing began, the boys sat quietly with their attorneys at a table positioned between the gallery of witnesses and the judge.
When I saw them, it was like seeing two little boys. And I couldn't feel anger toward two little boys that had made a terrible, terrible, stupid mistake.
The prosecution presented 2 hours' worth of evidence. Then Judge Ralph Wilson, Jr. called on shooting victims and their families. Mitchell Wright was one of 4 who gave a victim impact statement, an opportunity to describe how his life had been shattered by the events of March 24th, 1998. Wright recalled that his wife, Shannon, had talked about quitting work and staying home to care for their 3-year-old son full-time. She had decided to work 1 more year because she loved teaching. Addressing the boys directly, he said, "I not only lost a wife, I lost my best friend, thanks to you two."
I'm looking at these 2 boys. Mitchell Johnson knows what to say, how to say it. He's a yes ma'am, no ma'am, yes sir, no sir. He was sitting there shaking his head. Yeah, you're right, you're right. I looked at Andrew Golden. No one home.
After the last victim spoke, Judge Wilson gave the boys a chance to address the court. Andrew declined, but Mitchell had prepared a statement.
I mean, he's a boy yet, and I did not know whether he had that kind of conception of this, or, that they might want to spit on him, or, call him any kind of name. And he said, "Mama," he said, "can't say or do anything any worse than I already think about myself."
Mitchell Johnson stood up and, trembling slightly, began to read from a piece of paper. "I'm sorry," he said. If I could go back and change what happened on March 24th, 1998, I would in a minute. He then added that the killings had been a mistake. Quote, I really thought that no one would actually be hurt. I thought we would shoot over everyone's head.
And I believe when he has said this, his story has never changed, that he thought he was shooting above their heads. He never thought anyone would be hurt, say nothing to killed.
I have to believe they were wanting to scare them. I think they must have been wanting to scare them. I can't believe they actually wanted to kill them.
I don't buy that. You were not shooting over their heads. I want to know if he targeted my wife. If he did, why? You know, what did she ever do to him?
At the Craighead County Courthouse in Jonesboro, Arkansas, on the morning of August 11th, 1998, the young schoolyard killers, Mitchell Johnson and Andrew Golden, stood before Judge Ralph Wilson, Jr. All that was left was for the defense attorneys to enter their pleas and the judge to rule. Mitchell Johnson pleaded guilty. Andrew Golden entered a plea of not guilty by reason of temporary insanity. Judge Wilson rejected Andrew's insanity plea and found both boys delinquent, but added that, quote, here, the punishment will not fit the crime. He then gave them the harshest sentence he could under Arkansas law. Mitchell and Andrew were to be held at the Alexander Youth Services Detention Center until their 18th birthdays, plus 90 days. It amounted to 6 years for Andrew and slightly over 4 for Mitchell.
They killed 5 people and they're not even going to get a paddling. There's no way you could do justice. I mean, justice will not be in this case.
But it basically says in our state that if whoever kills you is younger than a certain age, then sorry, but your life's not really that valuable to us.
For the families of the victims, being spared the anguish of a trial had also denied them insights into this horrific crime.
The day of the hearing, after it was over, it was kind of like, wait a minute, this didn't happen. We didn't find out what went wrong. We didn't get the justice we thought we were going to get.
Had there been a trial, the defense would no doubt have included the testimony of psychiatrists, family members, and friends of the boys. That testimony might have helped to explain why they committed this crime.
Everybody that is asked about this wants to know why. I mean, people try to develop theories. Well, somebody was mad at a girlfriend at school, or somebody was unhappy with their home life. But I'm going to tell you that I cannot, to this day, find one reason that you could put your finger on and say, this is why it happened.
Shortly after midnight on the day after the hearing, a helicopter arrived at Craighead County Jail. It transported Mitchell and Andrew to the detention center, just outside Little Rock. The town of Jonesboro was left behind, in shock over the severity of their crime and the short sentences. Mitchell Wright and others affected by the Jonesboro shooting began lobbying for juvenile sentencing reform. Their efforts did not go unnoticed.
But I think all of us are uncomfortable with the idea that just because a person has blown out 18 candles on a birthday cake, that he or she is capable of going out and assimilating back into society. And it's one of the reasons we're having to really address our overall juvenile justice laws.
In April 1999, Arkansas legislators passed the Extended Juvenile Jurisdiction Act, a form of what lawmakers call blended sentencing. It allows the state to try suspects younger than 14 as adults and to imprison those convicted past their 21st birthday. But to use this provision, prosecutors have a heavy burden. They must prove that the underage offender was well aware of the consequences of his actions.
We've got to be very careful that we don't treat children like adults, because they're not adults. They don't think like adults. They don't have the capacity of adults. And they don't have the frame of reference or the capacity to understand things in the abstract like an adult.
The new law was met with considerable skepticism. Prosecutor Mike Walden says that while it's an improvement over previous sentencing guidelines, it is deeply flawed.
I think when prosecutors start to read this document and realize the minefield it presents for them in terms of trying to navigate it properly and get a prosecution that will hold up on appeal, they're going to see it's a nightmare.
Defense attorneys also worry about its potential applications.
Our juvenile law in this state is set up on the basis of attempting to rehabilitate. Whether that works or not, you know, that's for society to judge. I hope we don't go swing the pendulum so much in the other direction that we've really taken one step forward and two steps backward.
In the wake of the killings, Mitchell Wright and the families of the 4 murdered students joined in a civil suit against the parents of both boys and Doug Golden, Andrew's grandfather. Also named in the lawsuit were Remington and Universal Firearms, the manufacturers of the guns the boys used to shoot their victims. The plaintiffs charged that Andrew's grandfather negligently stored the weapons in his home. They claim that he should have stored his guns in a fail-safe vault and equipped the weapons with trigger locks.
It's not enough in this day and time to say, well, I told Johnny to leave the gun alone and he won't touch it because if he knows if he does, I'm going to, you know, he's going to be in trouble. That's not enough.
The suit also contends that the boys were clearly predisposed toward violent acts and that their parents were ultimately responsible for the Jonesboro tragedy. The boys' parents tried unsuccessfully to have the suit dismissed. In a rare public statement, Patricia and Dennis Golden said that they had raised Andrew in a loving and responsible manner. While they expressed sorrow for their son's actions, they contended that a lawsuit could not undo or explain why the boys did what they did. Gretchen Woodard shares their remorse.
And I still have trouble with it. I grieve for those little girls, and I grieve for the teacher, Miss Wright. And I don't think it'll ever go away from me.
Many in Jonesboro are weary of the tragedy and want to leave the events of that horrible day behind them. Wounded teacher Lynette Thetford lost 4 of her pupils and a colleague, Shannon Wright, in the ambush. The year after the shooting, Mitchell Johnson's younger brother Monty was among her 6th grade students.
You know, we're pulling together and we're going to be okay. We'll never be the same. And it's something I've decided we're not going to get over. We're just going to have to learn to live with it and cope with it and try to see that as much positive can come out of it as possible.
I won't move on until I figure out what went wrong here and until I can be assured that it's fixed. Because it'll happen again. It may not happen in Arkansas, it may not happen here, but it'll happen in another school.
The schoolyard ambush in Jonesboro, Arkansas was carried out by the youngest perpetrators of a mass school shooting in American history. The national grieving that followed it, and the incidents in Pearl, Mississippi, Paducah, Kentucky, Springfield, Oregon, and then Littleton, Colorado, have made understanding youth violence an urgent national priority.
It could have been anybody's kids. It could have been my kids who were the victims, and it could have been my kids who were the killers. And if you don't think so, then you're in denial.
The real way to fix this, better than blended sentencing, better than adjudicating children as adults, is to find out what in heck causes these kids to do this and try to stop it before it ever happens again.
For some, the answer is as simple as it is pervasive: violence in the media. Mitchell Johnson was said to enjoy gangster rap, and the Columbine killers were rumored to have drawn inspiration from the ultra-violent Oliver Stone film, Natural Born Killers. Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee is the author of Kids Who Kill, which examines why children are apparently becoming more violent.
The average child now will see 8,000 murders and 100,000 acts of violence before he gets out of grade school. That number will double by the time the kid gets out of high school.
Violence is the single most toxic substance any human being can take in, psychologically or spiritually speaking, and we're feeding it to our children because it is addictive and it brings money to the networks.
Author Dave Grossman, a retired Army lieutenant colonel, claims video games replicate the military's conditioning techniques, teaching children to kill.
We take them to the video arcade, and they learn to hold the gun in their hands. And they learn the motor skills, the conditioned reflexes, identical to what we do to our soldiers and our law enforcement officers when they learn to fire at human beings, stimulus, response, but without the safeguards.
The backgrounds of some of the young shooters seem to support this theory. 14-year-old Michael Carneal in Paducah, Kentucky, who killed 3 classmates and wounded 5, often played the computer game Doom, as did Harris and Klebold in Littleton. But critics say media violence is an easy scapegoat and too simplistic an answer.
There are some studies that indicate that exposure to violent material, television, is conducive to acting more violently. It looks to me as though, although most of us, and probably most kids, can watch the most horrendous material, and it may make us edgy, but we don't kill.
There are other factors that can contribute, such as access to guns. All of the shootings we've mentioned took place in states where it's legal for children under the age of 18 to own rifles or shotguns. Andrew Golden provided the weapons for the Jonesboro shooting from his parents' and grandparents' collections.
Does that mean that the gun culture made him that way, or were these just 2 particular individuals who were close enough to the edge that in their particular case the availability of guns made them dangerous, when in the vast majority of people's cases it wouldn't have had that same effect on them?
Walden's point is an important one. Exposure to violent images and access to guns do not mean a child will commit a violent crime. Psychiatrists point to another factor: trauma that may lie deep below the surface. By his own account, Mitchell Johnson was a victim of sexual abuse, a trait he shared with many others who have committed violent crimes.
The children that you see who are very young do extraordinarily violent things have been seething for years and years. They have been victimized in different ways, particularly extraordinary physical abuse and sexual abuse, because that, without question, children who are subjected to this and who keep this as a secret are like time bombs in a way.
Almost all of the boys involved in the school shootings were described as outsiders, and they were singled out by peers for ridicule.
This clique formation is inevitable in high schools, and you can, of course, caution people, don't pick on others just because they're not like you, but I think there's very little you can do to prevent this sort of behavior. To abolish cliques from adolescence would be tantamount to abolishing adolescence altogether.
But for a few disturbed boys, this alienation can inspire acts of incredible violence. According to the Humane Society of the United States, an early warning sign in boys who kill is a history of cruelty towards animals. Andrew Golden bragged about shooting a neighbor's cat. Luke Woodham, who killed his mother and 2 students in Pearl, Mississippi, had beaten the family dog with a club and set it on fire.
For Luke Woodham, it was knowing that he could take something that was alive and make it dead that gave him the sense of power and control that he felt was so completely lacking in his life.
After each school shooting, a close examination of the perpetrator's life revealed warning signs that were not taken seriously enough by adults.
The tragedy that I've seen, and this I have seen again and again, where they have given very clear signals. I am going to blow, I am out of control, I'm going to do something very dangerous, stop me.
Littleton's Eric Harris went so far as to create a website with the slogan, "Kill them all." For a school project, Harris and Dylan Klebold made a video of themselves shooting athletes and cheerleaders, then went on to wound 23 and kill 15, including themselves. Mitchell Johnson reportedly bragged about having, quote, "a lot of killing to do." These were boys on the edge. Some were already being treated for depression, and yet they snapped.
It's hard to know how to find children and get them under adequate psychiatric care. It seems to me if you notice the warning signs, psychiatric care is absolutely imperative. But if you don't notice the warning signs, then I'm not sure there's much you can do.
But the truth is, parents not only have an active role in helping to shape their kids' mores, But parents are the ones who are the filter, and whether it's video games or computer games or access to certain things on the internet, or television or movies, or even the friends they run around with, parents have to take an active role in being the filter and saying to their kids sometimes, no. And they're not doing that enough.
In the end, the realistic answer to youth violence is that there is no one answer, but many.
I tend to think that that people that look for simple answers in these cases are usually people with their own issues and their own soapboxes. If guns are bad, it was a guns case. If single parents were bad, it was a single parents case. Maybe that's what tragedies are made of, a little bit of everybody's soapbox.
There are no silver bullets here. I think we can do some things that are steps in the right direction. I think we can hold parents legally more accountable for the behavior of their children as a way of inducing them to watch their children more closely and keep guns under lock and key.
After losing her daughter, Brittany, in the Jonesboro ambush, Suzanne Wilson began campaigning for stronger laws to keep guns out of the hands of children.
And now I have a 1.5-year-old son that'll be starting to school in another 4 or 5 years. And I don't want to live with thinking, you know, every day that he goes to school, is this going to be the day that somebody brings the gun to school?
Since 1997, in 5 highly publicized school shootings, 27 people have been killed and 70 wounded on school campuses in this country. Increasingly, disturbed boys have been taking out their frustrations by killing their classmates. And what is perhaps the most alarming statistic of all, in a national survey of 1,200 children, 31% of adolescents aged 12 to 17 say they know a peer who carries a gun. In the wake of Jonesboro, American justice has had to grapple with a troubling question. When boys as young as Mitchell Johnson and Andrew Golden commit these crimes, how should they be punished? Many Americans understandably find it difficult to reconcile light sentences with heinous acts, even when the perpetrators are children. But experts agree that juvenile institutions offer them far better odds for a productive life than adult prisons, which can only succeed in turning violent youths into hardened criminals.